All right, let's dive into a massive cultural battle. It's one that pits a world-famous author against her very own creation. And it forces us all to ask a really fundamental question. Once a story is out there in the world, who actually owns what it means?
You know, for millions of people, Harry Potter wasn't just a series of books. It was a whole universe. It was a refuge, a place that taught us about right and wrong. It was this huge cultural thing that defined an entire generation. It really felt like a world that belonged to all of us. But then, years after the last book came out, the author, J.K. Rowling, kept adding to the story. Not with new books, though, but with public statements. And her views, especially around gender identity, caused this huge rift. It ended up alienating a massive part of the exact same fan base that saw her work as this, beacon of tolerance.
So this very modern conflict has basically dragged a century-old literary debate right into the mainstream. And now, we have to decide. Is the author the one in charge? Or is it the reader, the person who actually gives the work its life and its meaning? This is the showdown we're gonna unpack. In one corner, you've got the traditional belief in authorial intent, the idea that the writer is king. And in the other corner, you have this revolutionary concept called the death of the author, which says, nope, the reader holds all the power. So let's start with the classic view, right? The author is the absolute ruler of their own text, and whatever they say goes. Their word is law. Okay, so the theory of authorial intent is pretty straightforward. It basically says that a piece of art has one and only one correct meaning, and that meaning is whatever the author intended when they made it. The reader's job isn't to come up with new ideas or interpretations, but to kind of dig, to figure out what the author was trying to say. And this C.S. Lewis quote, it just captures that philosophy perfectly. It's basically telling the reader to submit your own life experiences, your opinions, your ideas. Those are actually seen as getting in the way. To truly get it, you've got to quiet your own voice and just listen for the creators. But what happens when the readers just flat out refuse to do that? Well, this is that problem in action. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle actually grew to hate his own creation, Sherlock Holmes. He thought the character was a distraction, so he killed him off. His authorial intent was crystal clear. Story's over, folks. But the public completely revolted. I mean, we're talking about 20,000 people canceling their magazine subscriptions, people wearing black armbands in mourning. It was a huge deal. And eventually, Doyle caved. He brought Holmes back from the dead. The readers, as a group, just refused to accept the author's final word. That kind of reader rebellion, well, it eventually got its own philosophical manifesto. In the 1960s, a French critic decided it was time to officially, formally, throw the author off the throne for good. The year is 1967. The critic's name is Roland Barthes, and he writes this essay called simply The Death of the Author. And it was basically a grenade thrown right into the middle of the literary world. Barthes' big argument was that no author ever creates in a vacuum. He said a text is really just a tissue of quotations. It's a remix of all the ideas, language, and stories that already exist in a culture. So the author isn't some author god creating out of nothing. They're more like a scripter who's just assembling pre-existing parts. And, Barthes argued, if the author isn't the true origin of the ideas, then the real meaning must come from its destination, the reader. And this is his revolutionary call to arms. For Barthes, this wasn't just some abstract theory. It was an act of liberation. To really empower the reader, to let them create meaning, the author's total control, their tyranny over the text had to end. So what does this birth of the reader actually look like? Honestly, there is no better case study than the Harry Potter fandom. I mean, long before any of the recent controversies, the fans were already putting the death of the author into practice. Readers did not need Rowling to tell them Dumbledore was gay to find queer meaning in the books. They saw a coming-out allegory in Harry's journey from a literal closet under the stairs into a magical new world. They saw Remus Lupin's struggle as a werewolf as this powerful metaphor for living with the stigma of an illness like HIV/AIDS. They analyzed the enslavement of house elves through the lens of racism and class. The text itself became this open space for them to find and create these incredibly powerful meanings. But, analyzing a text is one thing. The ultimate power move is when you take the keys to the kingdom and start writing the story yourself. And that's exactly why fan fiction is the most literal, most perfect example of killing the author.
In the world of fanfiction, readers become the creators. They explore romances that the author totally ignored, like the intense rivalry between Draco and Harry, or that deep bond between Remus and Sirius. They write fix-it fics to save characters they felt were killed off unfairly. They'll even deconstruct the heroes, reimagining someone like Dumbledore not as this benevolent guide, but as a cold, manipulative puppet master. This is the reader completely taking control of the narrative.
Okay, so this brings us to the central problem, the real modern twist. Barthes' theory was great for an era of print, when authors were these distant, mysterious figures. But what happens when the author isn't dead? What happens when they have a Twitter account and they just never, ever stop talking? We can really see two clear phases of this. In phase 1, Rowling was the benevolent creator. She'd add these little details that fans loved, like revealing Dumbledore was gay. She expanded the world in ways that felt inclusive, and people celebrated it. But then came phase 2, where she started sharing personal views on gender that many, many fans found deeply hurtful. And this created a direct clash between the author's own stated values and the values readers had found in her books. And hey, this kind of fight isn't new. Just look at the famous feud over The Shining. Stephen King, the author, absolutely hated Stanley Kubrick's movie. King wrote a tragedy about a good man's slow downfall. Kubrick, acting as a very powerful reader, made a horror film about a monster. For decades, both versions have existed side by side. It's a perfect example of authorial intent clashing head-on with a reader's interpretation.
Which brings us to the question, the one that millions of fans are wrestling with right now. In an age where the author is this constant presence in our lives, can you, or maybe even should you, separate the art from the artist?
And here's the crucial thing. Your answer to that question is totally rooted in this old debate. If you say yes, you can still love Harry Potter, you're basically siding with the death of the author. You're choosing to find meaning in the books themselves, and you're tuning out the creator's voice. But if you say no, then you're siding with authorial intent. You're insisting that an author's beliefs and their work are fundamentally inseparable. So where does that leave us? The author isn't dead. In fact, social media has kind of resurrected her as this ghost in the machine. But the reader has been born, and they've seized the power to critique, to rewrite, and to reclaim the story for themselves. So who owns it? Is it the creator who wrote the very first word, or is it the millions of readers who are making sure it will never ever have the last one? The battle for meaning? It's far from over.